In order to speak English fluently, you need to think in English. But do you find yourself always translating from your mother tongue into English? If so, this is the video for you, because I'm going to give you 10 key tips in order to start thinking in English today. Let's get started. First and foremost, number one is to label your environment. For example, if you are at home, you can maybe use some post-it notes to write down the names of different objects. But if you don't like to have post-it notes all over your house, which is understandable, you can just do it in your mind. So when you see different objects, different places, always ask yourself, what's that called? What's that called? What's this called? And then try to remember the names of items and objects in English instead of doing it just in your first language. As I said, with post-it notes or just using your mind. Number two is internal dialogues. To start having conversations with yourself in English. This could be out loud or it could be just in your mind, in your head. So an example would be if you are cleaning, you could be telling yourself, I'm going to vacuum, I'm going to do the dishes, then I'm going to scrub the bathtub. So start describing what you are doing to yourself in English, out loud, or just keeping it to yourself. But in addition to that, if you are making a decision, you can kind of ask yourself, would I rather have pizza tonight or pasta? Should I go to the gym or shall I just stay at home? So instead of doing this in your mother tongue, try to push yourself to switch and do it in English. The third tip is to set your devices in English. I bet right now you're watching this on your phone or on your laptop or on your smart TV, on your iPad. All of these cool gadgets and devices that we have in our hands constantly should be in English. If you want to immerse yourself in English, you need to start reading it on a daily basis and even more often than that. So it sounds easy and it sounds insignificant, but literally just changing the language on your phone and other devices into English will help you learn different words and phrases like save, upload, post, delete. You have run out of memory and stuff like this. And without you really realizing, you'll start thinking in English much more because you'll constantly be reading in English to actually do productive things, like posting a video, for example. Number four is to use English for everyday tasks, even the little boring tasks. One example would be that when you go to the supermarket, if you normally write a list to not forget anything important, write that list in English. That way you can review the vocabulary for fruit, veg, meat, fish, cleaning supplies, and so on. You could also set reminders in English. Let's say that tomorrow I need to remember to go to the hairdressers, to send a package at the post office, and also to ring my grandma. Well, instead of writing this down in your mother tongue, write it down in English. And then when you're about to make this call to your grandma, maybe speak to her in English too. So the most important thing to remember is that whenever you're doing any little things, everyday tasks, try to make sure that it's done in English. And if you can send text messages, have little chats with other friends or family, even at work, whether they're native speakers or not, do it in English. And then you will review and remember your vocabulary and find out where you're lacking and find out what types of words or topics you really need to focus on. So number four is to do everyday tasks in English. Number five is to consume English media, or at least English speaking media. And this could be listening to your favorite podcast, the radio, watching TV series, documentaries, YouTube videos, going to a cinema and watching a film in original version, if you want, with subtitles in English, or you can really put yourself to the test and do it without any subtitles. But as you wish, as you prefer. It's up to you at the end of the day. But all of this is going to make sure that you are immersing yourself in English and consuming as much of the language as possible. So even if you're not spending hours studying, writing down grammar examples, you're still going to pick up lots of nice phrasal verbs, idioms, expressions, and certain grammatical structures will just start to sound right, and they start to come naturally. You'll learn it almost by osmosis. You'll soak it all up. So that is the aim, and this, for me, is the most fun way to learn a language. In this case, English. Just consuming the media. Number 6 is to limit translation. Now, I don't mean to stop translating altogether, because it can be useful from time to time. You need to know what certain words mean. But what I'm trying to get across to you is that it's not always necessary to understand every single word, and you can waste time looking up words, which then distracts you from consuming the content. With a book, for example, with a TV series, with a conversation. If you're so fixated on one word, then it's going to take away from the overall experience. You're not going to enjoy consuming the media quite as much. So basically, long story short, try to focus on the overall meaning and guess the meanings of different words from the context. And that way, it'll be more enjoyable, you'll be more motivated, and you're not going to be wasting time with little random words that you're probably never going to see again. An example is that I read The Lord of the Rings in Spanish, and there were so many specific adjectives to describe hills and mountains. And since reading it, I haven't seen any of these words again. So, limit how much you translate. Number 7 is to learn common phrases. You know what I mean, right? So with this, what I'm trying to say is that once you reach an intermediate level of English, which you already have if you're watching this video, then to be able to blend in with the normal native English-speaking society, you need to start using key phrases, idioms, expressions, phrasal verbs, and when you hear that somebody else uses one of these phrases, try to use it yourself. Sometimes with languages, not everything can be translated directly, which is why it's important to pay attention when you are listening to a podcast, watching a series, and try to memorize some of these commonly used phrases that natives use and use them in your own speech. This, perhaps, it doesn't seem like an obvious way to start thinking in English, but if you are copying other speakers and using the phrases that they use, then inevitably their behavior and way of speaking will rub off on you. It will have an effect on you and you will adopt it. So learn common phrases. Number 8 is to practice mindfulness. To be mindful, and this means to be aware, to be conscious of where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, and what you're thinking. So, if you are a mindful person, you'll be aware of these things, and you will also start to become aware of switching from your own language into English whenever you are thinking, to try to remind yourself to put into practice all of these tips that I've given you in the video up until now. If you're mindful, you'll be able to, little by little, bit by bit, step by step, default back into English. So that when you're thinking, instead of thinking in your mother tongue, you start thinking much more in English and being mindful of the fact that you are doing it. Fingers crossed. Number 9 is to engage in conversations, to have conversations, to speak. Speak as much as you can. Normally when people are asking about your skills in a language, they don't ask, do you read English? Do you understand English? No, they ask, do you speak English? So, how can we improve our speaking skills? By speaking, of course. So, it's difficult. I know that it can be hard to have people to speak to. I've mentioned in previous videos that you can try to speak to different people who are learning your language and have a conversation exchange. Of course, you can hire a teacher and have conversation classes with them. You can also speak to your family and friends, even if they're not native speakers, or you can use different applications using AI technology to practice your speaking and have conversations like that. Or you can just record yourself like this and speak out loud. It doesn't really matter. There are levels in terms of which methodology would be the most successful. I would always recommend contacting a teacher and having conversation classes with them, but if you can't afford to do it, there are alternatives. You can find conversation exchange partners, you can speak in front of a mirror, you can record yourself, you can use ChatGPT. So there are endless options. The important thing is if you want to improve your speaking and start thinking in English, you need to speak. There's no way around it. Speak. Come on! Finally, number 10 is to use a dictionary in English. So, I mentioned avoiding translating earlier, and of course we can translate from time to time, but really, if you want to be thinking in English and using English only non-stop, we should be looking up new words and phrases in an English to English dictionary. So you don't have any translations, you just have the definition of a new word and then 1 or 2 examples. And these exist, of course, in physical form, but also on word reference. You can always put your settings as English to English, and that way you are studying English whilst you're looking up new English words. So again, it's a little thing, but it helps to ensure that you don't depend on your own language and you are independent in English because you can learn advanced new words using English to explain these words. So that's the final point, to use an English dictionary. Okay, that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and to finish, let me know in the comments how many of these 10 key tips to start thinking in English do you actually do? I look forward to reading your comments, and thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.